Hey friends, it's me, the Ebony Otaku, the well-rounded nerd. We are going all the way in today. So, spoiler warning and definitely trigger warning, because we're going to talk about that Studio Ghibli movie today. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Studio Ghibli, like all five of you. Studio Ghibli, in a lot of people's opinion and mine, is the premier production house for animated movies in Japan. They still keep to primarily hand-drawn animation, and they use a lot of stories that are either out of real life, historically, or slice of life, or they use a lot of Japanese mythology in their movies as well. And Hayao Miyazaki just has this innate ability with his studio to create films that connect with people. They are visually appealing. The scripts are second to none. And the characters are very relatable. And those are all the ingredients you need for a great movie. And I personally find hand-drawn animation fascinating, that people over and over again can produce good work with pen and ink and paper and cells. It's absolutely an incredible art, and my hat's off to anyone who has that talent. Now, this Studio Ghibli film is not one that Miyazaki directed. There was someone else at his studio who did that, and the name escapes me at this very moment. Still an amazing work. It is not the happiest film you're ever going to watch. It's not the happiest anything you're ever going to watch, because it takes place towards the end of World War II in Japan, and it centers on a brother and sister trying to navigate this world that has abandoned them. For those who are unfamiliar, I know that we've got a lot of younger folks who are starting to get into Studio Ghibli films. This is one that's going to shake you. It takes place towards the end of World War II, and it follows these two children as they try to navigate this world that has rejected them. Our brother-sister duo, Seita and Setsuko, are the children of a stay-at-home mom and a father who is a Navy officer. He is off fighting in the war, and mom is at home taking care of the kids. Well, one day their city is bombed. And because of that bombing, their mother suffers burns over most of her body and subsequently dies. Seda and Setsuko, like many orphans during wartime, go off to live with a distant relative, a distant aunt. And this is the part where you really have to start understanding the implications of war and having empathy for people in all situations. The children's aunt at first accepts them because, I mean, you got a relative who dies. It's not like these kids orphaned themselves. Dad is off, fighting for the country. Okay, yeah, I'll take care of you. But it was really out of family obligation. And their aunt makes it known to them that they are an inconvenience. You are taking food from my house. It's not like you can do any work to earn your keep. Look at what I'm doing for you. And when the mother passed away, she did leave some money in the bank. And Seda, being an older boy and learning from his father, he did actually bury some, things they might need in the future under the house. So while living with the aunt, he goes back to their burned down home and tries to dig out some of these goods they might need and gives it to the aunt in exchange for this place to live. But that's not good enough. And eventually what he ends up doing is taking his little sister Setsuko away from the home with their aunt, and they go off into this world to make their way on their own. And this is where the story really gets tough to watch, because what you're going to see next is the struggle of two children during wartime just trying to survive, and there really is no help for them. The first anime I reviewed on my channel was In This Corner of the World, which also takes place during World War II. And it's a very simple story about a young woman who was newly married, trying to navigate life during war. And this story is not unlike that. Although Grave of the Fireflies definitely came first, this is based on a semi-autobiographical telling of these times. And what you discover in stories like this is that at their core, the people who are just regular citizens of countries all want the same thing. All Seda and Setsuko want is to live. They're children. They need adults to take care of them. They need to go to school. They need food. They need clothes cleaned. They want to grow up and do something with their lives. And because of war, all of that's going to be taken from them. And when you look at a lot of societies that are still entrenched in very old traditions, a lot of African societies and Asian societies, there's clear roles for everyone in the family. And if you can't clearly fulfill your role, you're useless. And unfortunately, because these children's parents are not in their lives when they are at their time of greatest need, because they're not yet at an age where they can be productive for their relatives, they're seen as a burden. And it's easy to look at their aunt and say, how cruel can you be to turn children out? You know, but then we have to consider, if I was in that situation, how would I behave? You know, in my private life, I do a lot of volunteer work with kids. So I'd like to think that no matter what happens, I'm going to extend that right hand of generosity when a child is starving and in need. But I've also never lived through war. I've also never lived through food rationing. I've never had to choose which one of my children was going to eat and which one wasn't. I haven't had to choose which bill to pay. These are circumstances that are foreign to me. So I can't make a judgment on this character of the aunt on was she being cruel or was she doing what she had to do because of the extraordinary circumstances that they were all in? Because here's the thing about war. You know, unless it's a grassroots revolution, the vast majority of citizens aren't choosing war. War is happening to them. You know, it's something the government decided. It's something the landowners and the gentry decided. It is the wars of rich men sending poor men's sons off to fight the battle. That would be my dog scratching at this very moment, because that's what he does. He's got to make noise during my videos because doggies. Nobody chose this, but even in not choosing it, you still suffer the consequences. And the consequences of war are more than just, oh, who controls the oil, or this particular supply chain is or is not available, or maybe these certain products can't be sent to certain countries. There are far-reaching effects that, unless one experiences them personally, most people don't have a lot of empathy for, because most people have never been in those situations. So these children find themselves in extraordinary circumstances. They need to survive. They need to eat. They don't have adults in their lives that are going to look after them. And everyone's just trying to take care of what belongs to them. If a person is a parent during a time of war and they're barely able to feed their own children, it's not likely that they can extend generosity or gifts to other children. That's just the reality of it. And Grave of the Fireflies presents that reality in very clear terms. This is the result of war. These are the unknown victims who have no tombstones, who had no one to sing mourning songs over them, who were cast aside because there were greater things that needed to be accomplished in the world. So when they leave their aunt's home, Seda takes his sister to live in an old bomb shelter and proceeds to scavenge food wherever he can. Sometimes that means maybe we go down to the stream and we see if we can catch fish. Are there any wild vegetables growing? But, they're children. They weren't raised, out in the country, so they don't know all of that. So sometimes he has to resort to stealing to get food. And again, there comes the moral conflict. Well, he's stealing. Well, he's also starving. And he has a baby sister that he's trying to keep from starving as well. She becomes his greatest priority in life. If nothing else, he wants his sister to get to grow up. That's his goal. One of the things he's able to save from their burned down house is this tin of candy, which becomes the saddest symbol in the entire movie. Whenever his sister is upset or sad or can't take it anymore, he pulls out a piece of that candy and gives it to her. And for the moment, it's a piece of normalcy and it calms her down. It's not going to last forever, but while they have it, it's very important. Now, these are children living in circumstances that they are not equipped to handle. Even though he's stealing in order to feed them, Seda is punished when he's caught. He's beaten for stealing. And food becomes harder and harder to find because when countries are at war, the import and export process stops between countries that are not allies in that moment. Other countries become scared to trade with you because they don't want to be dragged into something, beyond their control. And then on top of that, the food that is being produced a lot of times is being taken away in great portions to feed those fighting the war. So it's just all around bad. And Seda and Setsuko start falling into the realm of malnutrition. And in going into malnutrition, we actually see these children's bodies start to wither, their clothes not fitting right, the cheekbones standing out more, their lips are getting dry, they're dehydrated, they lack energy, not able to get up and do the things every day that they should be able to do to take care of themselves. And there eventually comes a point where there's just no food. There's no food because the land is fallow from bombing. There's no food because there's no exchange between villages. It's war. These are the consequences of war. What does it matter if one government triumphs over another if there are no people left at the end? And that's what we're looking at here. People being destroyed because these children didn't ask to be here. But they're going to suffer for what the adults decided. And eventually, they get weaker and weaker. They end up in a cave, and to provide themselves light at night, they catch fireflies. They release the fireflies into the darkness, and they just for a moment light up this cave or the bomb shelter that they're in, and it's pretty. It's a nice moment. But when the day comes, the morning comes, they find that the fireflies have expired. They die. Because fireflies don't live long, They wake up, they do their firefly thing at night, and then that's it. And plus they couldn't leave the cave they were in to go out and, forage for food or do other things. They were trapped. They died. And that's the situation that Seda and Setsuko are in. They're children. Their lives have not been long. They haven't had a chance to go out and experience all of the things that children, young adults are supposed to experience. Finishing school, having your first kiss, weddings, children of their own, being proud of your job, buying a home. None of that is going to happen for them. They're like fireflies. They were alive and bright for a moment, but war trapped them. And because of that trap, they die. Setsuko is smaller and weaker. She starts succumbing to malnutrition first. And Seda takes her to a doctor, wanting to do whatever he can to save his baby sister, even though he has nothing. And the doctor tells him simply it's malnutrition. You know what? This isn't the first malnutrition I've seen. You're one of many kids. She's gonna die. He gets a little bit of food. He takes it back to the cave, tries to prepare it. And his sister is so weak. She's gotten to that point where she is hallucinating. She's delirious. She's exhausted. You know, when you're dying this way, your body actually for a moment seems more active. You know, if you've ever been around someone who is at the end of their life cycle and they're dying a natural causes death, there is this moment right before the end where it seems like they're all there, where everything's okay. Well, they're going to make it. But that's really just the body's last bit of energy being given up. And that's what Setsuko's going through. The hallucinations, the want for her mother. And he tries to get the food to her in time. It's too late. His baby sister dies in his arms. He cremates her body, and the little candy tin, he scoops her ashes into it and carries it around. Another keepsake he was able to recover from their burned home was a picture of his father. So now he carries with him the body of his sister, a picture of his father, and he's only got the memories of his mother who was killed because of the house fire. This child now has literally nothing. And at this point, towards the end of the war, these children who are orphans of war, no one has anything for them. There's no help. There's no orphanage. There's no foster care system. And our poor Seda finds himself, like so many of these other orphan children, in a train station, sitting on the ground, waiting to die. But the movie opens and closes with the most beautiful image. When he finally expires, the little candy tin is picked up by the train station custodian, who just tosses it off into the bushes. And when it breaks open, his sister's spirit is released. And you see Seda's spirit leave his body and join his sister hand in hand. And they're suddenly surrounded by a cloud of fireflies as they walk off into eternity together. The end of their suffering had to come through death. It would be a nicer story if some well-meaning couple adopted them and put them back in school, nursed them back to health, and everything just turned out right. They grow up, they find spouses and have kids of their own, and they're so thankful, and they become great successes in life, and they pay back these people who helped them. But that's not the reality of war. Most of the time, when wars like this happen, those that fall behind are left behind with no one to care for them, no one to protect them, no one to feed them. They're a liability to the rest of the country. They're a liability to anyone who would dare help them. People have their own families to take care of. So these children are just going to get left out. This is one of the hardest movies I have ever watched. And it's actually the very first Studio Ghibli film I ever experienced. It's a great movie that I will only have ever watched once in my life. I can never watch it again. It's too tough. But I think it's worth watching one time. It reminds me a lot of Schindler's List. You know, if you've not seen Schindler's List, I'm not going to review that whole movie, but it's a Steven Spielberg film. And it follows the story of Oskar Schindler, who saved a large number of Jews from death during World War II. And he saved them by building a factory where he employed workers that the Nazis otherwise would have sent to the gas chambers. And it shows what happens in war. As real as you can make it and a movie still get produced, he did really well showing what happened during that war. Because in World War II, there were atrocities happening all over the planet. I'm not a big historian. I mean, I like history, but I'm no historian. I was an English and theater major in college. But the history of World War I and World War II, I'm glad that it's required learning, and sometimes I wonder if we go deep enough with it, because what happened during that period of world history was just absolutely nightmarish. And if we don't learn from that history, we are doomed to repeat it, because there are victims of the choices the world makes. Whether the war was for good or ill, I'm not here to debate that. I'm not a political person. I'm not, a historical person. But the reality is there were consequences. And this story from Studio Ghibli shows the lives of two children who suffered the consequences of circumstances where they had no control. And we should be forced to think about the consequences before we enter into conflict. Now, like I said, I don't think I'll ever watch this movie again. It was just too hard. But it is a beautiful story because it's honest. And there's something about animation that enables storytellers to transcend human conventions and just pull you in. Because they're creating the world, they can intentionally draw your emotions and your eyes to certain items, and it goes right to your heart. I hope you give this one a watch. Again, trigger warning, if you're like me and stuff happening to kids makes you cry, it's gonna get you. I had to try not to cry doing this review. But it is worth the watch. Honestly, when the kids are studying World War II in high school, I feel like it should be required watching. But I don't make any of those decisions. Now, I'm getting better at this. I still don't have a complete outro, but I do hope you'll give this movie a watch. And perhaps we can talk about it in the comments, and you can let me know which Studio Ghibli film I should review next.